In one of the old, quiet mahallas of Tashkent, where the grapevines climbed over sun-baked walls and the scent of tandoor bread hung in the air, lived two lonely souls. One was Dilnoza, a woman who had just turned 30. She was a teacher at a nearby school, her days filled with the chatter of children and the rustle of notebooks. Yet her heart was a quiet, empty room. Since her father, her only family, had passed away a year ago, a profound coldness had settled within her. She found solace in the order of her small home, the neat stacks of books, and the predictable rhythm of her life. But this peace was fragile, a thin blanket that did little to warm the deep chill of her solitude. Her neighbor, separated only by a thin brick wall, was Jamshid. He was a young man, a designer whose world was confined to the bright screen of his computer. His fingers danced across the keyboard, creating beautiful worlds of color and form, but his own life felt drained of vibrancy. The loss of his mother 2 years prior had left a void that he tried to fill with endless work. He would stay up late into the night, the glow of his monitor casting long shadows in his sparsely furnished room. Like Dilnoza, he existed in a bubble of silence, surrounded by the echoes of what once was. The bustling life of the mahalla, with its boisterous children and gossiping grandmothers, seemed to happen on the other side of a glass wall. Their houses stood side by side, sharing a common wall that had seen generations come and go. They were neighbors in proximity but strangers in spirit. Dilnoza would sometimes catch a glimpse of the young man with tired eyes as he left for the market, his shoulders slightly hunched as if carrying an invisible weight. Jamshid, in turn, would occasionally see the gentle teacher watering the flowers in her small patch of garden, her movements graceful but tinged with a deep-seated sadness. They were two ships passing in the quiet sea of their shared neighborhood, each navigating their own storm of grief, unaware that a lifeline was just a wall away. Their loneliness was a silent, shared secret they didn't even know they had. The days turned into weeks, and the weeks into months, with nothing changing. The sun would rise, casting its golden light on the dusty streets, and set, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple. Dilnoza would mark her students' papers, her red pen moving methodically across the page. Jamshid would click and drag, building designs for clients he had never met. Their lives were parallel lines, running alongside each other but never destined to meet. The wall between them was not just made of brick and plaster. It was built of unspoken sorrow, of a deep and private pain that kept them locked within their separate worlds, deaf to the quiet rhythm of another lonely heartbeat, just a few feet away. One warm autumn evening, the predictable hum of the neighborhood was abruptly silenced. The power went out. Lights in every window blinked off, the drone of televisions and refrigerators ceased, and a sudden, deep darkness fell over the mahalla. For Dilnoza, this was an unwelcome interruption. She had been sitting at her small kitchen table, preparing her lessons for the next day. Now, plunged into blackness, the silence in her house felt heavier, more pronounced. The quiet was no longer peaceful. It was oppressive. She fumbled for a candle, her hands tracing the familiar outlines of her furniture. The tiny flame flickered to life, casting dancing shadows that made the empty rooms feel even larger and lonelier. It was in this profound stillness that she heard it for the first time. A soft, hesitant melody began to drift through the wall. It was the sound of a piano, played not with the confidence of a master, but with a searching, melancholic touch. Each note seemed to carry a weight of emotion, a story of longing and sadness that resonated deep within her. She froze, the candle in her hand, and listened. The music was not loud, but it filled the suffocating silence of her home, wrapping around her like a gentle embrace. For the first time in a very long time, she did not feel entirely alone. It was as if the unseen person on the other side of the wall was speaking a language her soul understood. Jamshid, on his side of the wall, had found his work interrupted by the blackout. Frustrated, he had turned away from his dark computer screen. The silence pressed in on him, bringing with it the familiar ache of his mother's absence. She had been the one who had filled their home with music, who had taught him his first chords on the old piano that now sat collecting dust in the corner. On an impulse he couldn't explain, he lifted the cover and let his fingers rest on the cool ivory keys. He began to play, not a specific song, but a stream of chords and notes that poured out from the well of his loneliness. He was playing for himself, for the memory of his mother, unaware that his music was crossing the barrier of brick and reaching another lonely heart. The melody continued, rising and falling like a gentle breath. Dilnoza moved closer to the wall, placing her hand gently against its cool surface, as if she could feel the vibrations of the music more clearly. The notes spoke of a pain that mirrored her own, a quiet yearning for connection and warmth. In the shared darkness, illuminated only by her single candle, a strange and powerful connection was forged. It was a bond made not of words or glances, but of pure sound, a silent understanding between two strangers. When the music finally faded into silence, the quiet that returned was different. It was no longer empty. It was filled with the lingering echo of a shared feeling. The next morning, as Dilnoza stepped out into her small garden, she saw him. Jamshid was leaving his house, a portfolio tucked under his arm. Their eyes met for a fleeting moment across the dusty path. It was a brief, almost accidental glance, but it held a new significance. She saw the same tired eyes, but now she imagined the hands that belonged to them, moving gracefully over piano keys. He saw the quiet teacher, but perhaps he sensed a new curiosity in her gaze. No words were spoken. He gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod, and she lowered her eyes, a faint blush warming her cheeks. The moment passed, and he was gone, but the silent exchange lingered in the air between them. Days turned into a week, and the nightly concerts became a cherished ritual. As soon as darkness fell, Dilnoza would quiet her home, waiting. And the music would come, a gentle stream of notes flowing through the wall, telling her that she was not alone in her solitude. It became her companion, a source of comfort that eased the sharp edges of her loneliness. She began to feel a strange sense of gratitude toward her unseen neighbor, a desire to respond to his nightly gift of music. But how could she speak to him without breaking the fragile, silent spell they had woven? Words felt too clumsy, too loud for the delicate connection they shared. One evening, after baking bread, the warm, comforting aroma filled her kitchen. She looked at the golden brown loaf cooling on the counter. An idea, simple and heartfelt, took root. She took one of the loaves, still warm from the oven, wrapped it carefully in a clean cloth, and walked quietly to her neighbor's door. Her heart pounded in her chest as she placed the offering on his doorstep. It felt like a bold, intimate gesture. She did not knock. She simply left it there, a silent message of thanks, and hurried back into the safety of her home, her cheeks flushed with a mixture of fear and hope. The next morning, when she opened her door, she found a small, perfect white rose lying on her own doorstep. Tucked into its stem was a small, folded piece of paper. With trembling hands, she opened it. It was not a letter filled with words, but a simple, elegant drawing. It depicted a single loaf of bread, with musical notes rising from it like steam. A wave of warmth washed over her, a feeling so potent it brought tears to her eyes. He had understood. This was their language now, a conversation held through simple gifts and silent symbols. Their friendship began to blossom in this quiet space, a garden of small, tender gestures exchanged across the threshold of their doors. The old mahalla had eyes and ears everywhere. It was a place where secrets were as difficult to keep as smoke in the wind. The quiet comings and goings between the two houses did not go unnoticed for long. First, it was just curious glances from the elderly women who sat on benches, shelling sunflower seeds and watching the world go by. They saw the teacher leaving bread and the young designer leaving a flower. Soon, the glances turned into whispers, and the whispers grew into full-blown gossip that spread from house to house like wildfire. The story changed with each telling, becoming more dramatic, more scandalous. Did you hear about the teacher, Dilnoza? They say she is not so lonely after all. She has a man visiting her at night. Others would add their own imagined details. I hear them talking and laughing through the wall, one would claim, even though no words had ever been spoken. The mahalla, which had once been a place of community, now felt like a court, and Dilnoza was being judged. Her quiet dignity was mistaken for secrecy, and her loneliness was twisted into a story of shame. The whispers followed her like a shadow when she walked to school or to the market. For Dilnoza, who valued her peace and her reputation above all else, the gossip was a heavy blow. The judgment in her neighbor's eyes felt like a physical weight, pressing down on her spirit. She had lived her life carefully, honoring the memory of her parents by being a source of pride, not shame. Now, this simple, innocent connection, this one small source of light in her lonely existence, was being tarnished by ugly rumors. The joy she felt when listening to Jamshid's music was now tinged with anxiety. The small gifts they exchanged, once symbols of a pure bond, now felt like evidence in a trial against her character. Jamshid was not immune to the whispers either. He heard the pointed comments and saw the disapproving looks. He felt a rising tide of guilt and anger. He had only wanted to share his music, to reach out from his own island of grief. He had never intended to cause trouble for the quiet, sad-eyed woman next door. The gossip made him feel protective of her, and furious at the small-mindedness of the world. Their silent friendship, which had been a private sanctuary for them both, was now exposed to the harsh glare of public opinion, and its delicate structure began to tremble under the weight of suspicion and judgment. The weight of the gossip became unbearable. One evening, as the sun began to set, Jamshid knocked on my door. It was the first time either of us had done so. When I opened it, I saw the deep distress in his eyes. He held a small, wilting flower in his hand, a stark contrast to the fresh rose he had left before. The air between us was thick with unspoken tension. The silence that had once been our comfort was now filled with the ugliness of the neighborhood's whispers. He looked down at the ground, unable to meet my gaze, the words catching in his throat. "I am so sorry," he finally said, his voice quiet but full of pain. "I heard what they are saying. I never meant for the music to cause you any harm. This is my fault." He looked up at me, his expression earnest and full of regret. "If it is hurting you, if it is destroying your peace, I will stop. I can sell the piano. I can even move away. Your reputation is more important than my music." His offer hung in the air, a sacrifice born of guilt. He was willing to retreat back into his complete solitude to protect me from the storm he felt he had caused. I looked at him, at this young man who had unknowingly become my anchor. The thought of the music stopping, of him leaving, created a fresh wave of desolation within me. It was in that moment that I found my own voice, a strength I didn't know I possessed. "No," I said, my voice firm, though my hands were trembling. "Please, don't stop, and don't leave." I invited him in, and for the first time, he crossed the threshold of my home. We sat in my simple living room, the space where I had spent so many nights listening to his music, and the dam of our silence finally broke. We talked for hours. We spoke not of the gossip, but of the loneliness that the gossip had threatened to expose. I spoke of my father, of the echoing silence he had left behind, and the coldness that had seeped into my bones. Jamshid spoke of his mother, of her love for music, and how playing the piano was the only way he could feel close to her memory. We discovered that our grief was made of the same material, that our solitude was cut from the same cloth. Our words were hesitant at first, but they soon flowed freely, a torrent of shared pain and understanding. The wall between us had finally dissolved, replaced by a bridge of true, spoken connection. Time passed, and their friendship deepened. They began to talk more often, sharing quiet cups of tea and stories from their day. The nightly music was no longer a message from an anonymous stranger, but a conversation with a dear friend. Their bond became a small island of warmth in the cold sea of their lives. However, the gossip in the Mahalla did not cease. In fact, their open friendship only seemed to fuel the fire. The whispers grew louder, the judgments harsher. They were no longer just neighbors. They were a scandal, an affront to the neighborhood's conservative values. I, Dilnoza in particular, bore the brunt of the criticism. One afternoon, as I was returning from the market, one of the older women of the neighborhood stopped me. The woman's words were sharp, laced with venom and self-righteousness. She accused me of having no shame, of dishonoring my family's name by openly associating with a young man. A teacher should be an example. The woman spat, her voice loud enough for others to hear. "What kind of example are you setting?" I walked away, my face burning with humiliation, the woman's cruel words ringing in my ears. The joy of my friendship with Jamshid was now completely overshadowed by the public shame it brought me. That night, I sat alone in the dark, but there was no music. The silence from the other side of the wall was deafening. I realized with a heavy heart that our connection, which had saved me from loneliness, was now a chain that was dragging Jamshid down. He was a young, talented man with a future ahead of him. I could not let his name be tarnished because of me. I could not bear the thought of his bright future being dimmed by the shadow of my shameful reputation. My love for him, a quiet and deep affection that had grown in the silence, demanded that I protect him, even if it meant sacrificing my own happiness. With tears streaming down my face, I wrote a letter. It was the hardest thing I had ever had to do. My dear friend, I began. You brought music back into my silent life, and for that, I will be forever grateful. But I cannot be the reason your life is filled with ugly whispers. I cannot be the cloud that darkens your sun. You have a bright future, and you must pursue it without this burden. I am leaving. Please, do not look for me. Live well, and create the beautiful things you were meant to create. I left the letter on his doorstep along with a single pressed flower from my garden. A final, silent goodbye. By sunrise, I was gone. Years passed. The old Mahalla changed, as all things do. New families moved in, and old stories faded into memory. Jamshid had moved away not long after my departure, unable to bear the silence of the house next door. He poured all of his pain, his loneliness, and the memory of our brief, beautiful connection into his art. He traded his design work for a canvas and brush, and his talent, fueled by deep emotion, blossomed. He became a painter of renown, his work celebrated for its profound depth and haunting beauty. His name was no longer whispered in the alleys of a small neighborhood, but spoken with respect in the grand galleries of the city. His latest exhibition was the talk of the town. Titled Echoes Through a Wall, the collection was a journey through light, shadow, and silent emotion. People thronged the gallery, their voices a low hum as they moved from one masterpiece to another. The paintings were abstract yet deeply personal, filled with a sense of longing and quiet connection. There were canvases depicting fractured light, silent rooms, and musical notes that seemed to float in the air. Each piece was a fragment of a story, a testament to a memory that had shaped the artist's soul. Jamshid stood quietly in a corner, watching the crowd, his face impassive but his eyes searching. In the center of the main hall, commanding the attention of all who entered, was the exhibition's centerpiece. It was a large, breathtaking painting. The canvas was dominated by darkness, a deep, velvety black that seemed to absorb all light. In the center, a single, flickering candle flame cast a soft, warm glow. Its light fell upon the keys of a piano and illuminated a thin, almost invisible line that represented a wall. Through this wall, faint, ghostly musical notes drifted, reaching toward the faint silhouette of a hand, resting gently on the other side. The painting was titled simply, "The Night the Power Went Out." It was a masterpiece of silent storytelling. Viewers stood before it, captivated by its raw emotion. They spoke of its technical brilliance, its use of light and shadow. They saw a story of loneliness and hope. But for Jamshid, it was more than a painting. It was a prayer. It was the entire story of his connection with me, Dilnoza, distilled into a single, powerful image. It was his way of honoring the woman who had heard his music in the dark. It was a monument to a love that had been born, lived, and ended in silence. Its memory now immortalized in oil and canvas for the world to see, even if no one else understood its true meaning. Among the crowd of art critics, students, and admirers, one woman stood motionless before the central painting. I was older now, my face etched with the quiet lines of time and experience, but my eyes held the same gentle depth. It was me, Dilnoza. I had built a new life for myself in a different city, a quiet life, but the memory of Jamshid and his music had never left me. When I heard about the exhibition by a famous painter with a familiar name, a pull I could not resist had brought me here. Now, standing before this canvas, my past rushed back to me with overwhelming force. I saw it all in the painting. The sudden darkness, the oppressive silence, the first hesitant notes of the piano. I saw my own hand pressed against the wall, my heart aching with a loneliness I had thought was mine alone. I saw the candle that had been my only companion, and I felt the warmth of the melody that had saved me. Tears welled in my eyes and began to trace silent paths down my cheeks. I was not crying from sadness, but from a profound sense of recognition. He had not forgotten. Our story, our silent secret world, was real. It was here, captured in brilliant color and shadow for all to see. From across the room, Jamshid saw me. His heart stopped. Time seemed to slow down, the murmuring of the crowd fading into a distant hum. He had painted this scene 1,000 times in his mind, but he never truly believed he would see me again. He watched as I wept silently, my gaze fixed upon the canvas. He saw that I understood. I knew that this painting was not for the critics or the buyers. It was for me. It was his final letter, his ultimate silent offering, sent out into the world in the hope that it might somehow find its way to me. And it had. He took a step forward, then another, his path clearing as if by some unspoken command. He stopped a few feet away from me. Our eyes met across the gallery space, across the years of silence and separation. There were 1,000 things to say, a lifetime of questions and explanations, but in that moment, no words were necessary. My tears and his painting had said it all. His gaze was full of the same longing and affection I remembered, and in my eyes, he saw not pity or regret, but a deep, unending understanding. The world around us disappeared, and for a brief, timeless moment, we were just two souls, connected once more by a silent, invisible thread. Nothing more was said. No grand reunion, no dramatic embrace. After a long, silent moment that stretched into an eternity, I gave him a small, sad smile, a smile that held a world of acceptance and gratitude. I wiped my tears, turned, and walked slowly out of the gallery, disappearing back into the stream of life. Jamshid did not follow me. He understood. Our story was not one that could be lived out in the bright, noisy world. It belonged to the quiet spaces, to the silent nights, to the memory of music drifting through a wall. To try and force it into something else would be to break its fragile, perfect beauty. Our love was a testament to the fact that some of the most profound connections are the ones that remain unspoken. It was a love that was not measured in shared words or public declarations, but in silent gestures. A loaf of warm bread, a single rose, a piece of music played in the dark, and finally, a painting that captured a memory. It was a love that was invisible to the judging eyes of the world, a secret garden that bloomed and wilted away from the harsh light of scrutiny. It existed in the space between the notes, in the quiet understanding that passed between two lonely hearts. Sometimes, love is not about possession or a shared future. Sometimes, it is about a silent acknowledgement of another's pain, a quiet offering of comfort without expectation. Our story, the story of Dilnoza and Jamshid, was a quiet melody in the grand orchestra of life, a song heard only by the two of us. I had given him the peace to create, and he had given me the knowledge that I was not alone. Our sacrifice was not a tragedy, but a final, selfless act of love. I left to protect his future, and he immortalized our past to honor my memory. The story of Dilnoza and Jamshid teaches a simple, powerful truth. True love does not always need a voice. It can be a silent, invisible force, a current that runs deep beneath the surface of our lives. It can be found in a glance, a gesture, a shared moment of understanding. It is a connection of souls that transcends words, distance, and even time. Our love was a whisper in a world of shouts, but its echo was eternal, forever captured in a painting of a candle, a piano, and a melody that once passed through a wall on a dark and quiet night.